Narrator calm, reflective, almost nostalgic. Spring is supposed to be the season of life. Fresh air that makes you want to breathe just a little deeper. Flowers that seem to appear overnight. Those long days that fade into warm, golden evenings, where everything feels possible again. After months of cold and darkness, the world wakes up. Windows are thrown open, letting the breeze carry in the smell of rain and grass. Clothes sway lazily on backyard lines. People wander outside for no reason other than to feel the sun on their skin. There's a sense of renewal in the air, like maybe, just maybe, the bad parts of the past have been washed away with the snow. At least, that's the promise we're sold. But the truth? Not every spring is gentle. Sometimes the warmth doesn't welcome you. It pulls you closer. Sometimes the blossoms you've been waiting for all winter hide something you were never meant to see. And sometimes, the season you've been counting down to becomes the one you'll remember for all the wrong reasons. In spring, change comes fast. The snow doesn't just melt. It reveals things. Things that have been sleeping. Things that might have been better left buried. Bare trees suddenly grow dense, casting new shadows where the light used to be. The air feels different, charged, like the world is holding its breath. And the people, well, they change too. You start noticing faces you don't recognize. Footsteps in the mud that weren't there yesterday. Windows you're sure you closed, now sitting just slightly ajar. Spring has a way of making everything feel alive. Even the things that shouldn't be. These are 3 stories. 3 true accounts of spring days and nights that should have been beautiful, but became something else entirely. A man who blooms where no one should. A spring break that ends in a nightmare. And a greenhouse that refuses to die, no matter how much you want it to. So, enjoy the season. Step outside. Breathe it in. But keep your eyes open. Because spring might be beautiful, but it's also the season when the world wakes up. And not everything that wakes up should. Music fades into a soft, unsettling wind. Narrator lower, almost whisper. Let's start with the blooming man. Narrator calm, almost nostalgic. I grew up in a small farming town. One of those places where the only traffic jam you'll ever see is a tractor moving at 5 miles an hour down Main Street. Everybody knows everybody, and if you don't, someone's aunt or cousin will fill you in before you even get the chance to ask. Spring was always our favorite time. The hills would turn a shade of green you only see after months of snow. Wildflowers would stretch across the fields like they'd been painted there overnight. The air was so fresh it almost felt like you could drink it. Every year, it all built up to the Spring Festival, our big event. There were food stalls, live music, and a little parade that seemed way more exciting when you were a kid. It was tradition, and tradition meant comfort. But that changed 2 years ago, and it started with a man in a field. Faint wind, boots crunching on gravel. At the time, I'd just gotten a new job at the bakery. It was the kind of place that opened before sunrise so that by the time the rest of the town was awake, the smell of bread and cinnamon rolls had already made its way down Main Street. Every morning, I walked the same dirt road into town. It cut straight through farmland, and every spring, one particular stretch of earth would explode with color earlier than anywhere else. I used to love that walk, especially in the early light, with frost still clinging to the edges of petals. That's where I saw him. At first, I thought he was a scarecrow, standing right in the middle of a thick patch of blooming wildflowers, tall yellow and white ones that swayed gently in the wind. He wore a brown coat, sun-faded and frayed at the cuffs, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face completely. His arms hung at his sides. Still, too still. I remember slowing down, my eyes catching on how detailed it looked. The coat sagged in places the way real fabric would if it were hanging off skin and bone. The boots looked worn, cracked leather, dirt in the seams. Even the stance. It didn't have that loose, careless balance scarecrows usually have. It looked grounded, solid. I kept walking, but the image stuck in my head long after I'd reached the bakery. The next day, he was still there. Same place, same clothes. Only this time, his coat was buttoned differently. I stood there for a second, squinting. Maybe the wind had shifted the fabric. Or maybe one of the farmhands had adjusted it. But still, something about it felt wrong. It was early spring, the kind of cold that makes your cheeks sting and your eyes water. Even the flowers had frost clinging to them in the mornings. But the man didn't. His coat looked dry, his hat untouched by dew. By the third morning, I noticed something else. Halfway down the road, I looked toward the field, and I swear, he was facing me. Not fully, just his head. It was tilted slightly, just enough to see a pale sliver of face under the shadow of the hat. I froze mid-step. Could have been the light. A trick of perspective. That's what I told myself as I forced my legs to keep moving. But I walked faster that day. That night, while wiping down the bakery counter, I mentioned it to my coworker, Mrs. Harding. She was in her late 60s, the kind of woman who knew every piece of town gossip before anyone else did. "Oh, that's just old Mr. Wilkes's scarecrow," she said with a little laugh. "Been out there for years. Gets moved around sometimes. Nothing to worry about." But when I asked her exactly how long it had been there, she paused. "Actually, I don't remember seeing it before last year." She frowned, then shrugged. "Guess time flies." The next morning, I heard it before I saw him, whistling, faint, but carried perfectly on the cold spring wind. It was a slow, tuneless melody, not cheerful, not sad, just steady. I stopped walking. The sound was coming from the field, and there he was, same spot, only now, his hat was tilted back slightly, enough for me to see more of his face. The skin was wrong, not in a rotting way, not damaged. It was the wrong color, like flower petals left too long in the sun, pale, almost brittle looking. And his eyes, they were too dark, too deep, like there was nothing behind them except more darkness. I walked fast. When I reached the bakery, I locked the door behind me, even though it wasn't opening time yet. Over the next week, the whistling became routine. Same tune, every morning. Sometimes I'd still hear it after I passed the field. Faint, like it was following me. Then one morning he'd moved. He was closer to the road now, almost at the fence line. His head was up fully this time, and his face, it wasn't wrong anymore. It was too perfect. Smooth, unblemished, like someone had painted it. And in his hand, or maybe just caught in his fingers, was a small bunch of wildflowers. Fresh ones. 2 nights later was the spring festival. The whole town was out. Music from the bandstand, the smell of frying dough and roasted corn, kids darting between legs with balloons and sparklers. I should have felt safe, but I didn't. I left early, telling people I wasn't feeling well. The walk home was quiet, the sounds of the festival fading behind me until all I could hear was my own footsteps. When I reached my porch, I noticed something on the ground, a trail of yellow petals, leading to my back door. I froze. Then I heard it. That whistle. Close. I turned. He was standing at the edge of my yard. Hat gone. Face pale and perfect in the moonlight. In one hand, my scarf, the one I'd lost a week earlier. In the other, a single fresh flower. I ran inside, locked every door, every window. The whistling didn't stop until almost sunrise. The next morning, I went to the police. They checked the field, empty. No scarecrow. No man. Not even a trampled patch of flowers. I quit the bakery that day and moved in with my sister 2 towns over. Now, every year when spring comes, I get a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, there's always a pressed flower. And a photograph of me, taken from a distance. Always in spring. Low, uneasy music swells. Then fades. Narrator softly. Sometimes the flowers aren't the only things that bloom in spring. Sometimes people do too. Even the ones who shouldn't. Narrator, calm but with an undercurrent of unease. It was supposed to be the perfect spring break. Not the kind you see in commercials. No crowded beaches, no parties, no neon drinks. Just 4 of us. Me, my boyfriend Kyle, and our friends Hannah and Marcus. We wanted something quiet, remote, a week away from people. We found it. A cabin on the edge of a half-frozen lake in northern Maine. The listing was vague. Just a few grainy pictures, the words "perfect for fishing," and a rental price so low it almost felt like stealing. When we arrived, the air still had that knife edge of winter. The lake was thawing in patches, floating chunks of ice drifting across the dark surface. It was quiet in a way that made you feel exposed. The old man who met us at the dock had skin the color of driftwood and a voice like gravel. He handed us the keys without a smile and said, "Stay out of the water after dark. And if you hear splashing, don't go looking." We laughed. We thought it was local color, a creepy little folk warning to make the city people nervous. It worked, but only for about 5 minutes. Day 1 and 2 were perfect in that rustic, could-be-a-postcard way. We hiked. We built fires big enough to keep the cold at bay. We made coffee in an old metal percolator that tasted faintly like rust, and it somehow made the mornings better. The lake was breathtaking when the fog rolled in. It would drift across the water in slow sheets, curling around the dock posts like fingers. Day 3 was when things shifted. The thaw had pushed the ice further out. The shoreline mud was exposed now, black and slick. That's when we saw them. Marks, not footprints. Long grooves, like something had pressed deep into the mud. The impressions were too wide for any animal we knew. They looked almost like fingers, except each was tipped with something sharp. Marcus joked it was a bear. But bears don't leave webbed impressions. That night we heard it for the first time, the splashing. Not the gentle ripple of ice breaking, but something heavier, something moving. It started close to midnight. A single splash, then silence. Then another, like something testing the water. We tried to ignore it, pulled the curtains shut, pretended it was nothing. But at 2:13 a.m., Kyle shook me awake. "There's someone outside." We went to the window. The moon was so bright it made the lake glow silver. And on the glass, wet handprints. The palms were huge, the fingers too long. And between them, thin, translucent webs, stretched like wet silk. We stayed up until dawn with the lights on. Day 4 started with Hannah swearing under her breath. Her camera was gone. She'd left it on the porch the night before. We found it later, half submerged in the shallows, still on. When we scrolled through the photos, the last 3 were wrong. The first, the lake, half hidden by fog. The second, the same shot but with ripples spreading across the water. The third, something rising out of it. Ahead, smooth, pale, eyes like black stones. No whites, no irises, just bottomless. By day 5, the mood was different. Marcus kept pacing the cabin. Hannah barely spoke. Kyle kept glancing at the windows. That evening, Marcus went out to the dock to get some cool fog shots. He promised he'd be 5 minutes. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When we went down to look for him, the dock was empty. His phone was lying face down, screen cracked, still recording. We didn't watch it there, we took it back inside, shut every curtain, locked the doors. The video was less than a minute long. Fog, a splash, something heavy climbing onto the dock, just outside the frame. And then a wet, dragging sound, like something pulling itself across wood. That night, the water came for us. It rose too quickly, faster than any tide. By midnight, it was lapping against the bottom steps of the cabin. We could hear things moving in it. Not fish, not the wind. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Inside the cabin. We were upstairs, huddled in the smallest room with the door locked. Downstairs, furniture scraped across the floor. Something wet slapped against the walls. And under it all, a sound like breathing. Slow, deep, almost human. The smell was unbearable. Brackish water and something else. Something metallic. By sunrise, the water had pulled back. The cabin was silent again. The front door hung open. On the porch were Marcus's shoes, both filled to the brim with lake water. We didn't even pack properly. Just threw our stuff in bags, drove straight back to town, and shoved the keys into the old man's hand. He didn't ask why. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "Ice keeps things sleeping. Spring wakes 'em up." Narrator, slow, reflective. My Uncle Henry wasn't the kind of man who could sit still. When he retired, he didn't buy a condo in Florida or spend his days on a golf course. He bought land, a big stretch of rural property miles away from the nearest neighbor. And in the center of it, a greenhouse. It was massive, 50 feet long, its steel frame black with rust, every glass pane cloudy with decades of neglect. Ivy crawled up the sides, knotting itself so thick you could barely see the interior. Most people would have torn it down. Henry saw a project. Day one of cleanup, he noticed something strange. The greenhouse was warm inside. Too warm for March in New England. The moment he stepped through the door, his glasses fogged. The air was damp, almost tropical. And the plants, they were alive. Not just alive, but thriving. Thick vines crawled up every support beam, heavy blossoms sagging under their own weight. Some flowers were pale and almost translucent, their petals so thin you could see the veins pulsing faintly inside. Others had shapes he couldn't identify, spirals of black leaves, seed pods that twitched if he got too close. On a workbench near the back, he found a stack of leather-bound notebooks. The handwriting was cramped, neat, and unsettlingly clinical. Most entries detailed feeding cycles. One page listed dates and moon phases. Another described night blooming behavior. And then there was one page that had only a single sentence underlined twice. Never open the vents after dark. Narrator lower. Henry told me about the first night. He was in bed, reading when he heard it. A soft tapping. Not on his window. Not on the door. On the glass of the greenhouse. It was rhythmic, like fingers drumming on a tabletop. He looked outside, but the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the glass was too fogged to see clearly. The next morning, he checked for damage. There were no cracks, no chips, but on the inside of one pane, the condensation had been disturbed. 5 perfect streaks dragging down. Over the next week, the tapping became a pattern. Always after midnight, always in bursts of 3. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from one side of the greenhouse. Sometimes from every side at once. And the plants, they were growing faster. Leaves he'd trimmed the day before would reappear overnight. Flower buds opened and closed in hours instead of days. Some vines shifted position between morning and evening, curling toward the door when the sun went down. Narrator slightly hushed. The spring equinox was when everything changed. Henry woke just after 3 a.m. to a noise like glass breaking. He grabbed his flashlight, stepped outside, and froze. The greenhouse was glowing. Not brightly, but enough that it pulsed faintly in the dark. A heartbeat of pale green light from somewhere deep inside. The glass walls were moving, not shattering, bending, bulging outward under the pressure of the growth inside. And the door was open. Henry told me that stepping inside felt like walking into another world. The air was hot, heavy. His clothes stuck to him immediately. The smell was overwhelming. Floral? Yes, but rotten underneath, like compost left too long in the sun. He swung the flashlight beam across the room. Every plant was facing him, not turned toward the light, toward him. Vines shifted on their own, curling in slow arcs, like snakes tasting the air. A cluster of blossoms near the center opened in unison, revealing rows of fine, hair-like filaments that trembled when he moved. Something brushed his arm. A vine. Felt smooth for a moment, then sharp, like tiny teeth hidden just beneath the leaves. He dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, spinning the light wildly. In the brief flashes, he saw things moving that shouldn't have been able to move. A seed pod pulsing like a throat, a cluster of roots twitching just under the soil. When he turned to run, the door slammed shut. From the inside, the heat rose instantly, the air becoming thick, wet. His breath came faster. The plants pressed closer. He swore he heard them making sounds. Faint clicks, almost like whispers. And in the middle of it all, something bloomed. Not a flower. Not exactly. It was large, the size of a person curled in on themselves. Its petals, if that's what they were, peeled back slowly, revealing something wet, glistening, and aware. 2 eyes, buried deep in the center, opened. Not human, but focused entirely on him. Henry didn't tell me how he got out. He just said he woke up outside, lying in the dirt, with the greenhouse door shut tight behind him. The glow was gone. The air was cold again. When he went inside later that morning, everything looked normal. But the vines had grown back over the path to the center, hiding whatever had been blooming the night before. 3 weeks later, the property was up for sale. The real estate listing made no mention of the greenhouse, not in the photos, not in the description. But when I drove by to see for myself, it was still there. The glass was spotless, the steel frame freshly painted. Inside, everything was lush and green, bursting with life. And in the center, half hidden among the vines, was a shape, human-sized, half covered in blossoms. His face tilted toward the door. Glass creaks in the wind. Leaves rustle, fade to silence. Narrator, quiet, almost a whisper. Some gardens grow vegetables, some grow flowers, and some grow whatever they're fed. Narrator, steady, reflective, but with a shadow of warning. Spring is the season we wait for. After months of gray skies and frozen ground, we crave it. The warmth, the color, the life pushing up through the soil. We tell ourselves it's the beginning of something safe, something beautiful. We drop our guard because the air smells like blossoms instead of frost. But maybe that's the trick. Narrator, lower, leaning in. The truth is, winter doesn't kill everything. It just slows it down, freezes it in place. And when the thaw comes, when the ice melts and the ground softens, everything wakes up. Not just the things we want. A man in the flowers who watches you walk by. A lake that wakes up hungry. A greenhouse that grows more than plants. Music swells subtly, a faint chime under the piano. Maybe the danger isn't that these things happen in spring. Maybe the danger is that, in spring, we're too ready to believe we're safe again. Winter makes us cautious. We bundle up, we move slower, we keep to the warm light of home. But in spring, we step outside with our eyes wide open, and we don't notice what's looking back. Brief pause. Soft sound of wind through reeds. So the next time you step outside and smell fresh flowers, take a moment, look around, listen closely, check the water, the woods, the glass panes in the garden. Because sometimes what's waking up in spring isn't meant to be here. And once it's awake, it might not go back to sleep. Music slows, fading toward a single, low note. Narrator, quiet, almost a whisper. Spring is for life. But life comes in many forms.